They try to make me go to rehab. I said no, no, no. Yes, I've been black, but when I get back, you'll know, no, no. I ain't got the time, and if my daddy thinks I'm fine, just try to make me go to rehab, and I won't go, go, go. This week we're doing Amy Winehouse's final installment. Well, I don't know, technically, sort of ish. The B-sides came back from the dead. I don't know.
Welcome to the Essential Albums Podcast, where three guys from 85 have a conversation about some of the biggest albums ever and forgotten favorites from yesteryear. We'll dig into an album's place in culture, discuss its merits, and decide if a record holds up and is worth your time. Of course, we get into a lot more than that, so join longtime friends Ryan, Anise, and myself, Gordon, as we dive into our favorite albums and relive some of the classics. All right, so yeah, as you were singing before, one of the most recognizable, catchy tunes of like the 2000s, I would say.
Yeah.
It was Amy Winehouse. So this was a Ryan pick this week. So why did you go with Amy Winehouse or this album?
Well, this album is just like so classic sounding, and for me, it came at like I got into it maybe a little bit late because I got into it after college, but I just finished like going to college for jazz. So then when I got to know Amy Winehouse, specifically this record, I was like, oh, look at all these players. This is like real music on the radio by like real musicians. I felt like vindicated that I had not wasted my time. I thought maybe there'd be a whole bunch of, more Amy Winehouse albums and maybe I could get on one. Didn't work out that way.
No, unfortunately not.
No.
Unfortunately not, yeah. So I guess we can kick this off by asking, I'm interested to hear your answers on this one. What is your relationship to Amy Winehouse, Anise?
Well, I would listen to her when this album first came out. It seemed like it was everywhere, especially Rehab was just kind of on the radio nonstop. And I wouldn't say it was like I got into it right away, but it was something I was sort of aware of. It seemed like there was a trend at the time where there's a lot of these interesting British female singers coming out. There was like MIA before this and Lily Allen.
Yeah, that was the other one.
Yeah, and then she came on. I kind of relate those three in a weird way because they're all British females that did something interesting, taking a lot of different influences.
Estelle, did she come out at the same time too?
I think
American Boy.
After,
I think that's a 2000,
Yeah.
2008, 2007, right around there.
Yeah, it's a little bit after. But yeah, no, it was mainly songs from the album. Before I knew like the album from top to bottom was like Rehab, You Know I'm No Good, Back to Black. There was just so many singles off of this thing, and it seemed like she was also everywhere, like every late night show. But now I'll watch more of her live stuff, like on YouTube. There's a lot of her live stuff available. So I know BBC will post stuff and stuff. So my relationship with her now is usually just throwing that stuff on. So it's not usually throwing on an album. It's more just sort of just Amy Winehouse in general.
Yeah.
And how about you, Ryan?
Well, like this album I throw on for like a listen through. It's pretty short. It's only like a little bit more than a half hour, but I also put it on a lot to just practice drums along with because there's some really good musicians and there's some really subtle details in the playing or the production. I don't know how much of it was edited and how much of it is just like great players, but that kind of stuff requires pinpoint accuracy. So it's even though you might think, oh, it's just simple pop music, it's really clean. And like even when it's not clean, it's on purpose not clean a little bit. So yeah, it's a work.
If you really like these players, Ryan, do I have a thing to tell you about Sharon Jones and the Dap Kings?
What?
Because the band that plays on this album is the Dap Kings, and there's a whole other group called Sharon Jones and the Dap Kings, where it's the singer Sharon Jones with these players.
Just these, okay, you say these players, like when I looked at the list, it was huge. Like it's like a huge list of like there's our core units.
Yeah, like the main people who played on a lot of the Mark Ronson produced stuff were the Dap Kings, from what I read. I'm sure there's other people here and there, but
yeah.
But they have plenty of albums. Sharon Jones is another great singer as well, but
Yeah.
I would say it's not. This album is kind of a little different. I'd say it's kind of above that than their normal stuff, but no, it's also solid music.
Interesting. Yeah, when I was looking through the credits, I was looking to see who played drums on the record, and I saw like, well, there's one guy credited with drums, but not on every track, and there's a couple of percussionists, and I just clicked on one of the percussionists, and he just like does vibes. So like I don't know, I can't track down who played what on the album. It's just like it seemed to be a big effort, and
Well, 'cause when I was reading through, I would click on a guy. It's like, oh, it's the guitar player from the Dap Kings. And I read about drummer. Oh, it's a drummer from the Dap Kings.
right.
Oh, it's a bass player. Did the Dap Kings just play on this? And I'm like, oh yeah, they did. Like, I guess Mark Ronson just called them up.
Right on. Well, they did a good job. It's a
Yeah.
great. It's a consistent sounding album in a way that kind of can hurt it in a bit because the songs can kind of blend into each other a little bit much. Like they don't distinctly pop on a like the textures don't pop that much. You'll get little subtle differences, but it all kind of fits within the same.
Yeah,
You know.
I agree, but I do find there is a little bit of because the two different producers that worked on this, I find that there is a difference between the Ronson stuff as opposed to the Selam Remy stuff, and I find the Ronson stuff a little bit more like poppy and in your face and busy and more layered.
Okay. Okay. Wait.
Like,
I want to know what that difference is and which tracks are which. But like, Gordon, what's your relationship? We just kind of like skipped you.
Oh yeah, no, it's okay, guys. You guys are running away. No. Yeah. So I mean, my answer's pretty short. It's pretty close to like non-existent. This week was like the first week where I actually listened to the album from beginning to end. When it came out, it was such a big thing, so I did hear a lot of the singles and this her stuff on the radio. But I more or less kind of saw a bunch of scenes like over the years of from that Amy documentary, which I finally watched this week as well from beginning to end, the Academy Award winning documentary Amy. And I saw random scenes from it, so I got her vibe. I kind of knew you always hear what the story surrounding it, the media circus and all that stuff too. So that's kind of how that was my relationship to Amy Winehouse. This week was a pretty good week because I mean, I was fully exposed to Amy Winehouse. I leaned into it. I did on Spotify, you have Amy Winehouse Radio where it kind of just takes you down like the influences and stuff like that. So in that regard, it was a pretty good eye-opening week for me.
Yeah.
So I have a pretty short answer in terms of like my relationship to Amy Winehouse.
Right.
There was I will mention one thing because I think we were all at that V Fest, right? Virgin Festival. We all went to that.
Yeah. The one on the island. Yeah.
Evan?
She was supposed to be there, and she I guess went into rehab or went into hospital or something. So
interesting. I didn't even know that.
I think it would have been completely different for us if we would actually saw her live at that V Fest. Our relationship with her music, because it seems like before the show, Ryan was even saying it that there's so many great live versions of pretty much any song that it seems like her live show is a big part of her, like hearing that voice in person.
Yeah, and there's a lot of playfulness, and even with the band, like drum fills and stuff. So you can imagine that's especially suited for a live show. Like when you have good players, it's especially suited for a live show.
Yeah.
Duh.
Yeah. Well, I don't know who the touring band is. I'm sure it's a little different, but yeah, I'm sure she finds the best people out there.
Yeah. So Gordon, you weren't into Amy Winehouse then until she passed. So when
more or less, yeah.
So when she passed away, for you, it was just like, all right, another 27 Club. Like,
well, like I didn't even, like there was that fact that came out after, like, 27 Club, like that's kind of like a big deal. But like to me, it was always like I was just kind of hearing the noise. So you hear like, okay, the first experience that I ever had with her was rehab, and then so you're like, okay, you have this person who like in their own song is saying like they don't want to go to rehab, and it's like the poppiest song ever. And then you hear like, oh yeah, she's battling with substance abuse and stuff. So like there's all these signs and stuff like that, like of drug abuse, substance abuse, things like that, and just the media circus. And then it was just like you'll hear like small pieces of it. So like within like that 4-year period, I guess, from like 2007 to like 2011, it's like, oh yeah, now she passed away from alcohol poisoning. And it's like, I mean, when like me, I was like nobody could help her, like nobody stopped this. This is not suicide. It's like an purely accidental overdose, more or less, of alcohol.
I just remember like too, like around that time, it was almost like there was two Amy Winehouses because there was like the whole media storm, like what you're talking about with the in and out of rehab, her drug abuse, alcohol abuse, whatever was going on there, her relationships and yada yada yada. But then there was the music, which seemed like all completely different because I remember there'd be certain I forget what award show it was, but there's this whole like media storm about like her and stuff and like she was supposed to perform at this award show and leading up it's like is she going to be there? What's it going to be like? It might have been the Grammys. And then she showed up, sang amazingly and it's like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah.
Is there like what's really going on? But it's I guess you don't really know and especially I was a bit younger and back then too. I think in the last 15 years, addiction and all that stuff has been more in the media and talked about, and you hear more about it and more understandable. But yeah, back then it's like, why couldn't anyone save her? Like, why couldn't anyone stop her? It's like,
like who's around her? I mean, it's like we can get into a little bit later.
Well,
but
we know why. We know she says it in the song. She doesn't want to go.
She says it in her songs, but like in the
That's
Amy
the
documentary, in the Amy documentary, it really kind of like highlights like the key contributors and like what like it seems like a lot of people just didn't want to like step in and help. I don't know if it's for financial reasons or whatever, but yeah. So I can explain that a little bit better later on. But I'll ask this: how Ryan? How often is this album in your rotation?
It's probably like once a year, like a solid listen through. Yeah, or maybe I might do it a couple times in a row if I'm like practicing along with it. You know, I get into it. I'm like, oh yeah, that classic sound, and it's got it, but it's so short. So, and it sucks because like I got into this album first, and then started to get into Frank, and then she passed like right around the same time. So it was almost like that was her second album to me. Like it was still going, and then bam. So yeah, that sucked. But I still like this one more. So this one still comes out probably every year.
Nice. Anything to add, Denise, based on what you were saying?
Like for me, for how often for me, it's usually just more of a YouTube live video thing. Or I listen to the Valerie, but the version from the Mark Ronson album, the more upbeat version of it.
Yeah.
And like the video and stuff. But I for me, it's more live stuff that I will watch and listen from her because I know BBC and I guess it got into my algorithm at some point. So they spit out an Amy Winehouse video for me. It seems like once every couple of months or something. It's like, the live version of, Rehab, a live version of You Can Only Hold Her. It was like just different songs.
Yeah.
So, that's pretty much it. But yeah, it's very rare that I will actually go in and like throw the album on. But I think I might more now, which is after this week of listening to it.
It's a good like party album.
Chilling. Yeah, or just chilling.
Yeah, for chilling, but it's like kind of mid energy a lot of it. Like it's up tempo, but it's not like super aggressive. So and it's consistent, and it's got this consistent vibe to it. So if you want to set a classic scene at your party, but with like a modern twist, this is the album for you.
That's true too. Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that. I mean, in terms of one random thing. I always thought like this how little or how small of a fan I am of Amy Winehouse leading into this week is like I always thought Valerie was one of her own songs and it was on her album, and then when I didn't hear her on this album, I'm like, that's like the second biggest song that I know by her. So yeah, and then you dig a little bit and you find it's like actually a cover on a Mark Ronson produced album.
Yeah, but it's like a song by the Zootons, a band I've never even heard of.
Yeah.
I think it came out like 3 or 4 years prior.
I think when I looked up, I think it's like 05 or 06 is when that original came out. So it's like maybe I don't even remember the original. Do they sound similar, or is it just like everyone knows the Amy Winehouse?
It's more of like an indie rock pop sort of thing.
Okay.
Yeah. But no, it's good. I'm trying to think of who I compare it to. I don't know. Just sort of like an upbeat pop rock song. I can't even think of who I compare it to. But yeah, no, it's good. The original's good. That Mark Ronson album's good too, by the way.
Yeah. I'll check it out. Yeah, it seemed that I'm sure I've heard songs from it because it's Mark Ronson and they play that stuff like everywhere. But it seemed like it had a lot of good covers on it. Like I saw there's a Just cover on there. So I'm like, next week I'll throw it on and check it out.
Oh.
So I guess this can open us up to some general album song questions here. So this album was sort of a big deal. It had 5 singles from it. So the singles, they kicked it off with Rehab. Everybody That was such a massive song. That came out in '06. And then You Know I'm No Good, Back to Black, Tears Dry on Their Own, and Love is a Losing Game. So I think we all probably have the same answer to this. What do you guys think is the biggest song from this album?
Well, it'd have to be Rehab.
Yeah.
I actually heard I watched this like little clip of Mark Ronson on Howard Stern talking about this song and how like it was pretty much when him and Amy were first meeting. He was saying how they brought him in, they wanted him to like help produce like Amy Winehouse next album. He was like kind of familiar with her first album, and he wasn't sort of he's more like a pop producer, so he wasn't used to that sort of more of the jazzy thing. So he didn't know how it was going to work out. But they were working together, and he said they were out one day going out for a walk, and she was just sort of talking, and she's like, "Yeah, they tried to make me go to rehab," and I said, "No, no, no." And then Mark Ronson's like, "Wait a minute," he's like, "That could be like a hook." And she was like, "Oh, I don't think it's gonna work or whatever." But yeah, and ended up just that was where it came from, just her saying it in conversation.
That's really interesting because like this song it's pretty. She's being very vulnerable, obviously.
Oh yeah, and then he said like after that, like based off that hook, she just went off and like wrote the song, and he's like she would be like a quick songwriter. She'd just go off and
yeah. It's like he unlocked the idea and gave her, oh no, it's okay to sing about your bad shit, and then she's like, okay, yeah, that's great. I mean, that's a good team then.
Yeah, I mean, I that's got to be, to me, I was thinking about it like this weekend. I'm like, that's got to be one of the catchiest like hooks ever, because like anybody anywhere can say like they tried to make me go to rehab, and without thinking about it, you know how to finish that, like the next line. Everybody knows it, right? And everybody can sing it, no problem. So, I mean, I don't think there's ever been a catchier substance abuse song. It's got to be up there. Like I'm sure there's some great ones out there, but like this one's like top of the list.
Like I know a lot of these songs on this album, like when you actually listen to the lyrics and hearing her talking about her alcohol abuse and her life and stuff, it's pretty tragic. But don't you guys find like this song kind of hard to listen to, knowing how everything ended up?
That's what it doesn't make it hard to listen to, but it does make it very special because
it does. But I don't know, for me, like even when it first came out and knowing like the storm around her whole like personal life and just hearing her sing those lyrics, it was kind of like, really? Like,
yeah, actually I remember that.
You put that down to pen and paper, like knowing that this is your life. And I kind of always had mixed feelings about just that that hook mainly, I guess.
No,
maybe
totally.
It was so in your face, but I guess that was part of it, part of the vulnerability, part of who she is and how her mind works and what she wanted for herself, I guess.
Well, I mean, like the producer opened the door, and maybe she never would have been like that open about her drug problems had he not opened the door for that, because it is shocking. And I do remember that now when I first hear it. I'm like, really? You're gonna be supporting like drug addiction? Is that what this is about? But like almost like her passing almost makes it like a Greek tragedy. You know what I mean? Like it makes it almost more poetic, because say if someone never heard the song before and they're like, oh, this is kind of a catchy song. It's crazy that she's singing about this. Who is this person? Well, then if you told them the story, that would probably carry some impact.
Like I find this album as a whole, like listening to it back if you listen to it back when it came out and just hearing like the lyrics and just even the style of everything in her voice, and then listening to it now knowing, you know, of the whole story of what turned out of her life and stuff, it brings a whole different light to almost every song on here, and it does make it more tragic and one of those, like you see it happening in front of you, but you don't really know because every artist is vulnerable. It's like it's like a warning sign right in front of you. I know it was like a similar thing after, even a friend of mine brought it up this week when I told him we're doing Amy Winehouse. He brought up Linkin Park's last album, and I guess Chester on that was very vulnerable, singing about stuff. And it's like, why didn't anyone help him? But it's like, well, he's an artist and he's singing. Like we don't really know. No one really knows the real person behind these songs, and you'd hope that people around her would help. So as an outsider, just sort of like, okay, Go to
I
rehab.
think, I think the other thing is too, like once something like that happens, like once somebody passes away, you look back on all those warning signs. You're like, it was so obvious, but you don't know it like necessarily in the moment, or it's like one of those things where it's like, yeah, she'll eventually get help, or he'll eventually get help. Like everything will be okay. It's just tough right now, and I think that's maybe what a lot of people think. But I mean, just going back to this song, especially with the context of like the Amy documentary, like a lot, like when somebody says like they're not going to rehab, and there's an obvious way to make something easier for themselves, and they're just refusing to do it, it opens you up a little bit. I know it's substance abuse, and I mean it's become much more nuanced since like 2006, 2007, but like that kind of thing totally makes her a punching bag for like late night hosts and stuff like that. And like even George Lopez, there's a scene in the Amy documentary where George Lopez is announcing the nominees, and he's like, record of the year is rehab, and he's like, oh, he's like, make sure you tell Amy at 6 o'clock when she wakes up. And then he's like drunk ass, like while he's saying her nomination, like just cutting her up, and everybody's laughing. It's all jokes and stuff in the moment. But like now it's kind of changed where like, I bet you see something like that now. And it's like, I mean, it's a little more nuanced. So it's more heartbreaking to see that.
It almost, if she hadn't passed, say she pulled through, she didn't need rehab, and like she made it happen anyway. It almost would have been worse for the song, better for her because she'd still be alive. But the song, the moral of the story is that maybe you should go to rehab, right? But if she made it without it, then that moral might be lost.
Yeah, I can almost see it, like just going through the lyrics this week, like it's almost more layered than that. Like it's in the way it's like she's not even saying like going to rehab to solve her problems. She's more in denial, and it's like it's even deeper than like this in the depression and the substance abuse. Like she's talking about like she's already been black, and when she comes back, like she's already been to the lowest of the lows, but she's almost happy being there, and like she's like it's just depression like talking. So it's really it's like everything's kind of like it's like a duplicity, or like there's multiple meanings to everything.
It's kind of like in the song "Crazy" by Gnarls Barkley, he even says there's something so special about that place, like being on that black side or the dark side, and it's something different. Like it's almost like a comfort zone for some people, maybe.
But at the same time, it's not a dark song. Like the music isn't dark. So I think the music's like an escape. Actually, a lot of the album feels, except for when they do go a little bit dark here and there, it's like an escape. It's like shit is not good, but this music is all I need. That's the kind of the feeling.
You might know this better than me, Ryan, but isn't that like a sort of like a thing about jazz where it's kind of this? It can be more upbeat music, but the lyrics are kind of a lot. It can be darker, singing about.
Yeah. I mean, like
thinking about your demons and.
That's like like Strange Fruit, Billie Holiday. It's like you can talk about some serious stuff in there, but even that's like it's not really a juxtaposition because it is kind of a slow kind of darker song. So no, I think it's just special the way she's singing so cheerfully about this terrible thing that ends up killing her in the end. It's just music is an escape. Like, I'm sure we've all had those times where we put a song on, we're just like, whatever stress we had was just floats away. Yeah. And that's maybe what she was doing.
But I think a part of it, too, like this goes away from like the whole idea of the juxtaposition. But I know in that same Mark Ronson interview, they were pretty much like, we want it to be like jazz songs with break beats, like jazz songs with hip hop beats sort of thing. And it's like, all right, that's literally what a lot of these songs are. So that's kind of the vibe I wanted to go for. And it's almost like the lyrics, because she had the songs written, like from what Mark Ronson said, he's like, they're all like perfect songs written. He's like, I just kind of had to arrange everything around it. It was very little for him to do, but.
Yeah, because she plays guitar too. Like I noticed she played guitar in a few tracks. So I don't know what her writing process is, but did she like write all the chords as well for the whole song? Or like she come with demos?
From my understanding, pretty much, unless you see like there's a couple of songs where there's other songwriters on part of it. But from what Mark Ronson, I was reading some Mark Ronson interviews and saw some interviews with him, but it seems like most of it's just sort of her. Mm-hmm. Yes, she had like a pretty fast writing process, and I don't know, going through her lyrics, just because how powerful her voice is and her singing style, it's almost like she can say anything, and it's
Yeah.
musical. Like there's some songs where it's what's the one that's like the Ain't No Mountain High sort of that tears dry on their own.
Yeah.
It's like she's just sort of like speaking almost, but it's like so songy. The
Yeah.
voice is so perfect. So I don't know.
And also her voice, like, she plays with the vowel sounds a lot. Like, it's not, I don't know, it's not like my regular speaking voice. So, but I feel like she exaggerates the vowel sounds sometimes. So it almost seems like she can hide some words. So you can't, you're
Well,
like, did she just sing that?
that's what I'm saying is that like she can say anything and make it musical. Like she'll stretch out
Yeah.
a word, kind of string words together and stuff. And it's like, oh,
Yeah.
it works.
Yeah.
So just kind of a random question. Is that like just pure like how like jazz vocal works? Like it's just all about improvising? Or is it like how do like when you say jazz, like in terms of vocals, like are they just singing over like a jazz track, or how does it affect like the vocals, like a person's performance?
I think in general,
Scat.
okay,
Usually
there's a spectrum here from classical music to jazz music. And on one side, you have jazz music, which emphasizes improv a lot of, and all the stuff is improv, and that's really what it's about. And whereas classical music, it's about playing the music as it was written however many hundreds of years ago exactly to the best you can, and following the freaking conductor. So when you are if you're going to consider yourself a little bit more jazzy, which I'm sure Amy Winehouse did, like she has that vibe, that feel, she can be playful with it. So I like, you might hear some, if there was alternative takes, and even maybe in the live show, the live versions, she probably is a little bit playful with some of the rhythms and stuff, some of the melodies here, riffing here and there. It's not like some rock bands you'll go see and like the singer just does exactly what's on the album. That's a different thing.
I think a part of it too, like I think what part of what Ryan is saying is she's not just even when she's live, she's not just singing the words of the song. Like she's like almost reliving the experience of like singing it. It's almost like it's the first time. Because even like if you watch performances, she gets emotional during songs because you can tell that she's like actually feeling the word. It isn't like, oh, I'm singing Rehab again, put the words on a prompt, I'm going to sing it just how I sang it on the album. It might be different that day because she's feeling a certain way or whatever. She might sing songs differently.
Yeah,
I think that's
totally
part of the jazz of like of
living
improv.
in the moment, being in the moment, like for sure. Because yes, you like a really great musician can get to that spot where they're just feeling the song as much as they can feel it and still play it perfectly, even though they're like not alone in their living room. They've got a whole huge crowd. And if you've got the chops where you can improv even while you're crying and all your notes will be right, then you'll probably do an okay job. Like, so yeah, it's a huge advantage. Practice, 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 so you can cry while you sing.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess just a couple other notes that I had here about Rehab. Basically, yeah. So the backstory with that, according to the movie, and I know her father, Mitchell Winehouse, he kind of like disputes the Amy movie a little bit about how the image or how he's represented in the movie. But basically, like there's a scene where it's like they're all trying to get her to go to rehab before she starts recording this album, just to like figure out her drinking. She wasn't into hard drugs at this point. But they just wanted to get everything aligned. And then so she was going around. She always listened to like what her father would say, and then he was like. He's like, do you need it? He's like, you probably don't need it. And then it seemed like the way the documentary kind of portrayed it, it seemed like more like he was looking out for getting her like career going and the financial side of it, and not necessarily thinking, he's like, you don't need rehab, right? And like, so even in the song where it's like, my daddy says I'm fine, like that's like literally like, well, as portrayed in the documentary, literally something that happened. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, it's a lot of, in a lot of her lyrics, there's a lot of conversations, and I was kind of wondering this week, I'm like, are these real conversations?
Yeah.
I guess according to the documentary, some of them are.
Yeah, so apparently like her writing style in the documentary, at least, it was more, she wasn't like a songwriter. She didn't set out to write songs. What she would do is she had like tons of like little notebooks, and she would write poems, and then she would just take snippets from poems and turn that into songs. So that's kind of how like it was like a process like that, but it was more just about writing poetry and working off of that.
Yeah, that sounds like you're just basically brainstorming nice prose or some nice, collections
Yeah.
of words, and then maybe one will pop out, and then you'll think of another rhyming one and be like, okay, this could work in a song. I mean,
Yeah.
like it's a little bit different writing straight up poetry without any melody or anything, because yeah,
Right.
obviously you don't have to worry about that. But
So I guess, yeah. So I guess we all agree the biggest song from this one is Rehab. Now, would you call it overplayed? I mean, in the moment, I thought it was a little bit overplayed, but I mean, it's catchy as hell. And hearing it now after some times passed, I didn't mind listening to it. It fits really well on the album. It's a great opener. How do you guys feel about it?
Yeah, at the time, yeah, it was pretty much at the time. It seemed like it was at least in Canada. It seemed like it was the only single that was played from this album. But I think now it's almost like you can almost hear any of the singles on the radio or just in the ether of someone covering it in like a tribute or on like a like a live performance. Like it's when she was performing back then, even she would perform a bunch of different songs. So I don't know. It seems like nowadays, since she is gone and there is a limited amount of music, it seems like they try to put different ones out there all the time, as opposed to just rehab over and over and over again.
yeah, well, it's a full album of pop songs, so even if
Yeah,
they're not singles, they could do well on the
yeah,
radio, no problem.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. The one thing I thought that was kind of interesting is like listening to like the older stuff this week, and then you'd hear like a Amy Winehouse song sprinkled into it, and like at first it wouldn't you'd hear the voice or something like that, and you wouldn't know exactly like unless you knew like, oh, that's Amy Winehouse right away. You hear the voice and you're like, oh, this sounds older, but like all of a sudden the production kind of takes you out of that. But then she's just dropping like swear words like left and right, and it's like, okay, you're not hearing swearing back in like the '60s on music. So it's like,
that's
okay, yeah, no, this is Amy Winehouse or somebody.
part of the thing. Like one of I forget which one you guys mentioned it at the beginning, where it's like it's like old music with like a modern twist, and
Yeah.
that's part of it. And there's even like certain songs, like I was saying, how Tears Dry on Their Own is pretty much like Ain't No Mountain High. It's like a play on that, like musically. And then you have Me and Mr. Jones as opposed to Me and Mrs. Jones,
Hmm.
which is about Nas. I found out.
Yeah.
Oh, really? I did not know that.
I guess she dated Nas. Like,
Well, I think they were good friends. I think the whole backstory, what I read, the whole backstory behind that was, I guess, well, in the song at least, she was dating somebody who missed the Slick Rick concert that she wanted to go to. And then when Nas was in town, he didn't want to go to that or couldn't make it to that either. So then she was like, okay, that's it. Like, that's where I draw the line. So that's more or less, and like Nas's real last name is actually Jones.
yeah, Jones, Nasir Jones.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, and then originally that song was going to be called Fuckery, but then the label was like,
Yeah,
you got to change it. Come on. So they changed it.
Well, I mean,
yeah. There's like there's a whole bunch too. Like a lot of the songs like you hear and it's like this reminds me of like an older song. You don't know if it's just like a reused
yeah,
melody or a reused bass line or whatever. It's almost like live samples, because these songs are almost like built like hip hop songs, because you have the break beats or the pop beats with like an old soul bass line or old jazz bass line and guitar part, which it's just a live band
well,
doing,
yeah.
doing a rendition of something.
It's like you don't have to when you have a bunch of musicians, you don't have to sample stuff.
Yeah.
You can be like, all right, let's play in this style, and I'm paying
Yeah.
you a lot, so you guys should be able to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's sweet. You don't have to pay for that
That-
license.
That's the cool thing with this album, though. Yeah, like what Gordon was saying, you can have like a playlist where it's like a whole bunch of older songs, older jazz songs, and you can throw in an Amy Winehouse song, and yeah, it might stand out a bit, but it kind of still blends in.
I
But you can
know.
also throw it in on a playlist with modern R&B and pop songs, because it's still poppy enough to fit in with that as well.
Yeah, I was wondering this today. Like, what if you took this album back into, I don't know what era it would fit into best, like 50s, 60s, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
What if you brought it back and played it for somebody? What would they think? What would their experience be? It's too many swear words, or would they be
no.
like, or would this? It would probably be a hit, an amazing, huge hit, because it uses all those, licks that are kind of cliche now, but back then maybe not so much.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just to add on to that, going through like today and listening to like that older stuff mixed in, like Amy Winehouse kind of peppered in with that. Like she's got such a great voice, and I would compare like the closest I could think of her voice, like that brassy voice. It's like kind of like a mix of like Nina Simone, but it's got a little bit of a raspiness to it, kind of like like Billie Holiday or Macy Gray. Like it's not Nina. It's just as strong as Nina Simone's voice, but there's a little more. I call it a raspiness, but more of a. I don't know. There's tons of texture in Nina Simone's voice, but more texture.
And like just her voice when you first hear it, you get this sound where it's like, oh, it's that classic. Like that classic sounding voice is like perfect, for hearing in a lounge or something like that. But then you try to think like, who does she actually sound like? And her voice is still like so unique that like you're like, oh, it's kind of like Billie Holiday, it's kind of like Macy Gray, it's kind of like, but it's not like it's still very unique in her own, which is the power of her voice.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I had that same thought today. I'm like, which jazz singer does she sound like? Like, she sounds like a jazz. Which one am I thinking of? And it's just like a mixture of a bunch, and then she becomes her own thing.
Yeah, it's funny. Like actually listening through like today when I was trying to like kind of trying to like kind of feel the album more, and I'm sort of listening, and you kind of get through like Rehab. You're like, oh, this is a good song. Then you get to the second track, you're like, oh, she's actually like a really good like songwriter. Like these are like this song's really good. And then by the time you get to like Back to Black, you're like, the whole time her voice is great, but when you get to Back to Black, you're like, her voice is amazing. Like this album is just tragic all over. Like it's such a loss.
Yeah. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yeah.
So it's quite the journey listening through it. But
yeah, and it's one of those things where like I know so many people sat down with this album when it came out, but if you didn't sit down with the album and just like listen to the lyrics, like you just think it's like some poppy British chick who's like out having a great time. Like you take it on a superficial level, but when you dive into it, you're like, wow, this is it's like a tragedy.
Yeah. I would say like for me, like when I was first hearing her stuff, it was more superficial because I didn't actually dive into the album. It was just like, oh, here's another Amy Winehouse song. Here's another Amy Winehouse song. And it's like, oh, yeah, this is good. This is good. This is good. But I wasn't actively listening until kind of more recently where I kind of rediscovered her again through like live videos where it's like, wow, like she's great.
Yeah. I mean, that's why probably a reaction to Rehab was like, what?
Yeah.
So what is this like? Yeah. So, but what she was really doing was revealing. All we had to do was listen to the rest of the album, because she doesn't hide it. Like you don't take much paying attention to the lyrics to hear the conflict, to hear the struggles.
Yeah. So I guess that's a good segue into favorite song. So Back to Black, I had as my favorite song. I think it's just like such a powerful song. And then when you hear the lyrics and you know the context about like how she's writing about, well, it was her ex-boyfriend at the time who in the movie, and like just based on the facts alone, like what I've read about, his name's Blake Fielder Civil.
Or Civil.
And was that?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh yeah, no. And then he was just like a production assistant. On music videos. He met her in 2003, and then I think in 2005, 2006 they were kind of dating, and then he ended up breaking up with her to go back to his ex-girlfriend. So that's where like Back to Black is like the whole context is there, and he was the one that more or less introduced her to hard drugs later on. So they got back together in 2007. I mean, conveniently after this album's blowing up, and then they get married in 2007. But yeah, like even in the song where she's like contrasting like her boyfriend in the song and herself, she's like, he's into blow and she's into puff. Like that's just exactly what the relationship was. And he's quoted in newspapers as saying, he's like, I'm the one that introduced her to like crack and heroin. And he's like he was totally a bad influence on her. Like one of the people like that kind of kept her out of rehab or would only rehab with her, which is like apparently a really big no-no. So that's why it was never really successful. And like nobody really stepped in to like kind of just grab this guy by like the scruff of the neck and be like, what the fuck are you doing?
I mean, that's the saddest thing about it. Like even if you do that, like you can't force people to help themselves.
True.
So
they're going to do what they're going to do, right?
Yeah, that's a tragedy because she's struggling like right in front of you while you're listening to this album, but it's only her can make it through. Like if like nobody can force her. Like we all want to think that somebody could have stepped in.
Mm-hmm.
What do you like in reality? Yeah.
Because then when you say that, then you're putting it on someone else where it's like it's really not. Like it's not anyone else's responsibility.
Right.
Yeah. And also, you don't really have the right to force anybody to do anything. So.
That's true. Yeah, it's totally up to them.
So
yeah, they were often photographed like in the media, like by the paparazzi, like they had cuts or bruises and stuff. Like they got pretty crazy together with during like their whole hard drug use phase. But I do know like Amy Winehouse, like I think in I want to say like in 2010, like after they got divorced, she quit all the hard drugs, but then she ended up just using alcohol like to substitute for all of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's really sad. But yeah, sorry, going back to Black, I did see a note somewhere that Mark Ronson, he wasn't sure how the bridge was going to go because like where it's like the Black, where she's repeating Black, and he's like, I didn't know if I was going to handle that properly or handle it well, and he was a little bit, he said threatened by that section of the song.
Because he didn't think it would be good, but didn't want to step on her toes, that sort of thing, or
Yeah, he just wasn't sure like how to handle the bridge, like that part of it specifically, like in terms of production.
You know, don't you think that song would make a good Bond theme song? It's just got that kind of plotting, dark female singer. That sort of thing.
I think she would have, if given the opportunity, she would have made a really good banger of a Bond song.
Yeah, she would.
Sure. Yeah. What's your favorite song, Anise?
Yeah, what's your favorite song?
I'm a Gordon. It was Back to Black. I just
really?
love that. Yeah, it's like pretty much what everything Gordon was saying. It's like such a heartbreaking song, and like her voice sounds perfect in it. The production is great. I just love that track.
One other side note, just to add on to that, I love those moments when you see documentaries, like just where it's like, oh, cut to a scene, or there's like a moment of like inspiration in the studio, and it's like, oh man, this just like happened, and they actually show like a good significant section of them recording Back to Black in the studio. An example that I always think of is just like Jay-Z when he hears like Dirt Off Your Shoulder, like that classic clip where he's in the studio with Timbaland and he hears Dirt Off Your Shoulder beat, and he just goes in the booth and just raps like Dirt Off Your Shoulder right there. So like moments like that, those are crazy. So I like seeing those in documentaries.
But I also wanted to point out, I'm also a big fan of You Know I'm No Good. I love the beat and the bass line of that track.
The horns, good horns.
They're great, and again, it's great like storyteller. She's a great storyteller in that track. And Love Is a Losing Game. I like that one too. It has like the nice like doo-wop sort of feel.
Yeah. Actually, Tears Dry on Their Own is my favorite song because I know it's like a play on that Ain't No Mountain High, but not.
Yeah, like, to license that. Yeah.
Did they actually have to license? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, but they didn't exactly that chord progression.
Well, they had to license that chord progression.
They did, yeah. They actually like the people have writing credits on the song.
Yeah. I understand. Really? Like, there's so many other songs that are borrowing chord progressions all the time. And what I really liked about this was because, like, her singing, her vocals over the top of that part, it isn't like that at all. They're totally different. It's Amy Winehouse. Almost like that. She can almost sing any words and it sounds musical. Like that kind of vibe, and then it just comes together at the end of the chorus with the title line.
So that's actually one of the Salam Remy beats, and he was like, maybe you should consider licensing like a lesser upbeat song, like for like the context of like what's like the album or this song, and then she had her mindset on that.
That's the whole thing, right? Juxtaposing that escaping into the good feels music, even when, so you don't have to maybe think about the bad feels.
And I find on like in the album context too, like after Back to Black and Love Is a Losing Game, it's a nice like upbeat track after those two, probably like two of the more darker songs on the album.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, Ryan, that was the one. Sorry, Tears Dry on Your Own is your favorite song?
That's my fave. It's my fave. I mean, there's a lot of other ones, but
what are some other ones? Name a couple more.
Addicted, the ending is really good. It's like a pretty pumpy ending. It's not just like a slow outro to the end of an album. It's worth waiting for. You know, it's worth the end of it.
It's funny because like it's listed as like the exclusive deluxe edition. It's on that version, but I think I've always known it being on the album. But the song before too, you can only hold her. That has like a punchy beat with the trumpet and everything too. That actually would have been a good closer as well. But then Addicted comes on, and that's also great.
Yeah, it's a good album. They just keep handing them out. Yeah, that song's got sweet like that 70s dry snare sound. It's like so crunchy. I have like the speakers here on my computer can take way too much treble. And I unfortunately had it up while I was first listening to the album, and it's terrible because there's a lot of crunchy stuff, a lot of distorted kind of stuff in the production, which is great. But if the treble's really high, it just sounds like static. You can't tell if something's wrong. But yeah, love that crunch snare.
Nice. So I guess for me, for underrated song, what do you think is the most underrated track? I don't really have much of anything because this is my first time listening to it, so I don't have anything like a deep cut or anything like that will resonate. What do you guys think?
For me, I put a song that I just didn't really see as like one of the most streamed. I don't really see many live versions of it or anything. I put Just Friends.
Yeah.
I like the whole like ska vibe of it. It's kind of like a change. It's different from like a lot of the other songs on the album, but still fits in with the theme of everything. It's a good track. It's good where it sits on the album too.
Yeah,
I like that song.
It's more like classic ska. It's got like the horns doing the offbeats instead of just your guitar. Yeah, and the intro to that song is so smooth. Like it just captures your attention right away. So classic, jazzy sounding. Yeah.
And I was actually kind of surprised that I was like, oh, I thought this might be one of the ones like in her top 10 most streamed for some reason, because it's pretty much this whole album in that on her Spotify for most listened to. But I thought this would be one of them just because it has that more accessible sound with it being ska. Like I could picture it on like a 90s mix almost.
Yeah.
Like a 90s more like a pop rock mix. But yeah.
Call No Doubt.
Yeah, I do like the reggae vibe. That's another Salam Rami track. Yeah, I agree with that. How about you, Ryan? What do you think is an underrated track on this album?
Yeah, okay. Well, I don't really know because like everything seemed to be so rated high. Like, I don't think anything was really underrated for the album because nobody was like that song. So like, no, I don't remember. I like anybody picking out. It doesn't really sink at any moment. Like it takes you through some ups and downs, but there's never a lack of quality. Just like we were talking about the end of the album, it seems like it could have ended already. They're just giving you more quality material. So
yeah,
it was rated very highly.
Yeah, I guess the other thing that adds to that is like you look at the back half of that album, or at least the last 4 or 5 tracks. Like a lot of them are like under 3 minutes long, so it's like hard to. It moves so quickly at the end that it's like you're in a track and you're out, and it just works so well. I mean, one song that I had towards the end, a note here, was like "Some Unholy War," and I thought her voice kind of sounded like Lauryn Hill a little bit when she came in, and then it got me thinking. Like, I wonder, like in the documentary, she was talking to like Questlove and a bunch of other rappers about putting together like a super group. So I always wonder like what she could have did if she tried rapping or rhyming or anything, like putting a verse together, if she could have pulled it off.
That would have been great. Questlove behind Amy Winehouse. Yeah. I'd go see that.
Funny how you put Some Unholy War. I put that as a song that I would skip.
Interesting.
Yeah, because I found it on like an album full of like such great songs. When I got to that one, it's sort of, I know it's short and so I probably won't skip it in the future when I listen to the album, but it is one of my lesser favorite tracks. It just sort of comes and goes. I didn't really, it didn't pop out and didn't seem as unique and fun as some of the other tracks. It didn't really do anything different and interesting for me.
So do you think it's just like the length of the tracks at the end that like just they kind of happens, they're so short that they kind of like become less memorable because like they're just moving so quickly towards the end?
No, I like the end of the album a lot.
I like the end of the album, but I would say it's more like a whole. Like it isn't like when you get to the end, it's all those like "Wake Up Alone," "Some Unholy War." It is kind of they come boom, 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 boom. It isn't like with some albums or some bigger, more they might end with like some big epic track or something, or some really slow track before the end or something crazy. Where this doesn't really do that at all. It just sort of keeps hitting you with tracks, and it's just pop songs. So yeah, they're only going to be 2-3 minutes long, so it makes sense.
That's true.
Yeah, it's just like
keep chugging along.
Totally. It's not like as a big like concept arc. It's just like pop song, pop song, pop song, ballad, pop song, ballad, pop song, stop. Like there's no which is good. It's good though. It's easy to loop the album because it doesn't feel like it has an ending.
Yeah. All right, so yeah, in terms of, I never owned this album, so for artwork, I didn't really have any notes or find anything for the artwork. I think there's 2 different cover versions, and then maybe there's like a third where it's like, I think maybe it's the deluxe version that's on Spotify, so it has like a third black, mostly an all black cover with her name on it. I don't know, do you guys own the album or have anything to add?
I never owned it, but yeah, I just remember seeing both copies at HMV at like the front. When you walk into the store, there's always like the CDs at the front. It seemed like it was there for like 3 years. Like it just never left that front rack being featured. I guess it was a popular album, so people kept buying it, and then so it makes sense. But I just remember seeing that cover everywhere, both covers, the deluxe edition and the regular.
Yeah. It's kind of burned into my mind too. Just the look.
Yeah. Because even like it being the deluxe edition cover on Spotify, I'm like, oh, it's this one. Like I remember, I always think of her like sitting on that chair or whatever.
Right. So did you guys have any before we move on from the song questions or songs, did you guys have any final thoughts on songs or anything that we've missed that you want to call out?
Maybe the only potential skip would be Wake Up Alone.
Really?
But,
I like the I like how it's kind of like has that hazy beach vibe sort of a bit on that one.
I think it's mostly because for me there's like on the next track like what is it, Some Holy War, there's like an unsteady hi-hat that I like to like challenge myself to play along with. It sounds like almost as if they looped the drums, but the drums weren't played to a click, so it didn't quite fit in with the grid. So there's like a little slowdown at the end of the bar. I don't know what the hell it is. Maybe they're just pushing samples, or maybe the drummer just did something cool for one bar, so they ended up putting in the whole song. But that's the reason I skip it, because I want to hear the next song.
So this takes us to, I guess this will be a quick one. Unfortunately, where does this album rank in Amy Winehouse's discography? I think we might all have the same answer, but
yeah, well, she only really had the 2, and then I guess 2 other post-death. I think there's like that Lioness and then the Amy soundtrack. So yeah, I'd say it's number 1, followed by Frank. Lioness is really good too. There's some good tracks, but I'd go Frank and then Lioness.
Yeah, me too. I mean, the post-death stuff is cool, but like, you know, somebody else decided to put it out, so it's a little bit of different, you know. It's weird putting it on the same ranking.
Yeah. No, I agree with you guys. But you brought up an interesting point earlier, Anis, where you're saying watching live videos is probably like the best way. So maybe catching live versions is the best. Like you got like the poppy Mark Ronson production of like those, that he definitely nails that style, that like that 60s soul style for sure. But hearing it live, I think, is probably just a different experience altogether. So it's probably worth catching out.
It's actually a good thing a good performance. It isn't Amy Winehouse, but it is Amy Winehouse. Was, I forget what award show it was, but Bruno Mars did an Amy Winehouse tribute. Amazing, amazing performance. So
yeah,
it isn't Amy Winehouse, but it's Amy Winehouse.
Yeah, I mean Bruno Mars has got a great voice. Like
and he went on and he
led the Super Bowl.
Mark Ronson tried to sort of recreate the same magic with him, but a lot poppier. Good outcome. But
yeah, that's good. He's not dead.
Yeah. So this is kind of almost like well, I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say as always. But is this Amy's Winehouse's peak, or where would you say her peak is?
Yeah, probably. Because this is like Frank is good, and the really cool jazzy like classic sounds and stuff, but it's the production of it is like more just like a pop record, you know. It feels like it's jazzy, but like everything's clean and pop sounding, whereas there's like a style on this thing. There's like a vibe it has. So it's like her voice found its perfect production.
Yeah, it's definitely like that first album is a debut, and this is a sophomore where she kind of finds her voice and her style and everything.
Yeah, no, for sure.
But I would say,
I think this is her peak too. It's the one that brought her all the success. It's the one that everybody knows about, right?
It's kind of weird though, because it's like almost like 2 peaks, because you have this, obviously this is where she had pretty much all of her fame, especially in America, came with this album. Became sort of a household name overnight. But then obviously, as a sad thing, as when any musician or any sort of celebrity dies, you get that huge boost. And I remember after her death, there's almost that echo. It's almost like Back to Black got re-released at that point because all the songs were everywhere all of a sudden, and it wasn't just Rehab this time. It was all
and like think about it. Like before she died, these songs kind of meant something else. When she died, like Rehab suddenly means something else. Like holy crap! Oh.
It literally almost gave you a different. It almost changed the album. Like it's almost like you got to listen to the same album for the first time again.
Yeah.
Just because every song, the context has now changed.
Yeah. Like if Kurt Cobain didn't hide his pain and all this weird metaphors and stuff, we might have got the same sort of vulnerability. There's your struggles. And then but instead when he died, you go back to listen to In Utero and you're just like, I'm confused. But this is like clearly you can see crap. You get this feeling like, why didn't anybody do anything?
Yeah,
it's way more tragic because, like, I mean, I know when we talked about like Nirvana and Kurt Cobain, we said like the peak was when he committed suicide, but like with this, it's like like they call it misadventure in the UK, but like it's all more or less an accidental overdose. So like all the weight, like it's not intentional. It's like if somebody was there maybe and found her earlier or anything, like it's just way more tragic than anything that happened with Kurt Cobain. Like that's really tragic too and sad, but like this is a little bit different.
Yeah, especially because you can clearly see like she's overtly displaying the denial sometimes. So it's like, oh man, crap. But
and there's some interesting videos. Like you were hinting at it earlier, and he's talking about the live performances. But like when you do watch some of the live performances, you see like kind of like the progression where it's like early on, she's kind of like nailing all the performances. She steps up to the mic, that voice comes through. And then you see some performances where like physically she's not looking great, but then when she gets to the mic, her voice comes through, almost like that Whitney Houston effect. Yeah. And then there's some performances like towards like the final 2 years where it's like she doesn't want to perform. She walks out, she refuses to sing. She looks like just wasted. She just sits down. And so like those last 2 years, especially like 2011, the performances in the documentary from that are great.
Or something
really rough to watch.
Or something if you watch live performances from like before Back to Black, like from the Frank era, it almost was like an indie artist because she'd be out there usually with the guitar around her neck, and it was more like a completely different vibe than the songstress that she became on this one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and at a certain point, like that's when I don't know what year, if she had the tattoos on this album, but you look at a picture of her from like 2004 and compare it to like 2009, and she's got like the tattoo with like the pinup girl on her arm and like all the crazy tattoos and stuff like that. Well, not crazy, but all the tattoos. So it's like even her as a person's like changing, like it's a weird thing to think about. But like when I first put on the documentary and you see her in like 2003, I think, or maybe it's 2002, where she's like kind of auditioning before Frank and stuff like that. She's 18, and it's like, for some reason in my mind, I always hear that Kevin Spacey voice from like American Beauty. It's like, in less than a year, I'll be dead. It's like, in less than 9 years, I'll be dead. It's like, you just know what's about to unfold. And it makes it tough to watch.
It's always interesting when you go back and you watch a documentary and you see the beginnings of something.
Yeah.
I had that thing, I was watching it was on Conor McGregor, and it was showing like Conor McGregor like in Ireland training, getting ready for a fight. And it's like, in 3 years, he'll be UFC champ. And it's like, you see him, he's just like a regular guy, no tattoos, and he's just talking about like wanting to be the best in the world. And it's like 3 years later, he's literally yelling at press conferences, like punching people. It's like, how did this happen? Like, it makes you realize that like celebrity is such like a tightrope. Like, you don't know which way you're gonna go. Like, it's not a clear path. Like, you can easily make a couple of wrong decisions and you end up like Amy Winehouse with addictions and struggles and problems, or you can end up go the other route where you become an egotistical maniac, or you can, like, there's so many different ways you can go. And just seeing like a documentary like that, just seeing go from one place to another, it's always like, it's crazy how life can change in such a short period of time.
Yeah. And there's some really sad things like towards the end of the documentary where like they're talking with like her best friends, and like one of them says like she remembers talking to Amy, and she's like, if like at the beginning in the interviews and stuff like that, she's like, all I ever want to do is just write music, smoke weed, play songs for like small crowds. Like I'm in jazz, so it's elitist. So we like the small crowds, we don't like the stadiums. And then towards the end, when her friend's talking, her friend's like, I asked Amy once, like, how do you feel about all this stuff? And she was like, if I could trade away like my talent, my voice, just to be able to walk on the street again without anybody knowing who I am, I would give it all away. And hearing stuff like that is like, you have like one of the greatest gifts in music. Like your voice is like so unique, and like the fact that you would want to do that is, it just shows like what fame can do to somebody.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
really sad.
Yeah, we all think it's, what do you mean? You give all that away? Yeah, right. But maybe it is actually terrible always having people watching you, like watching your every move. Can't even go get a coffee. It's like, what, you said vodka in that coffee there, Amy? No? Like,
Yeah,
Jesus.
exactly. You get all terrible questions and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
Especially like when your whole business is in the media now, like when people see you, it's not just, oh shit, it's Amy Winehouse. It's, oh shit, it's Amy Winehouse. Is she like drunk? Is she high? Is she like supposed to be in rehab? Is she like, what's going on? You know what I mean? Like it's almost like gossip.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's,
Or
I
it is
guess-
gossip.
yeah.
And I guess the whole other thing of it too is just like her body image. So like she did deal with like bulimia and stuff like that. So that's one thing where it just compiles onto it. That's mostly like the reason why she passed away. Like according to the autopsy, is like she drank a lot and then she had bulimia, and then because like her body was more or less like so frail and weak, it like her heart shut down, and that's how she died. So it's
Wow.
yeah, it's one of those things. I was talking to my wife earlier, and she's like, oh, she's like Amy Winehouse, just like she didn't have like a body that was like one of those bodies where she's like a role model. You always kind of saw she was wearing like wearing her disease, I guess. Like you could see it on her, right? Like from the progression plus everything else she was doing too.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just tragic. So I guess with that we can move on to where's her place in history. I'll kick this off just kind of with the Grammy facts. So on that night, she couldn't go to the Grammys because she couldn't get a visa. The reason why, she failed a drug test. So she performed in London, and it's a pretty kind of like, she performed I think 2 songs for the Grammys, and just watching her reaction when she wins Record of the Year, it's Tony Bennett that comes out to give the award, and it's like one of her idols, and she's just like losing her mind, like that it's Tony Bennett alone. And then when he finally like says the nominees and announces like she's got Rehab wins Record of the Year, she just drops, and you can just see her, and she's just so stunned that she like won that award, and it's Tony Bennett handing it out. And like based on everything else, like it doesn't seem like the Grammys are like all that stuff's very important to her, but it's just like those little moments, but especially when you see them, like I've seen TikToks with them where her reacting like that, and it just gives you chills. The second you see it, it's like there's nothing else seeing somebody like just losing their mind at like one of their idols, like giving them the greatest award you can get, really.
Like one of those things where it's like one thing to be like, oh, I don't care about a Grammy, but it's a whole other thing to be there on Grammy night being handed the award for album of the year from one of your idols. It's like, yeah, it doesn't mean anything until you actually win it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a pretty good like touching moment. I would recommend checking that on YouTube if you haven't seen it. But how do you feel? Like, what do you feel is Amy Winehouse's place in history?
Yeah, it's a hard one.
I think she'll go down as like one of the best female voices. Like she was pretty much put into that category, it seemed like instantly. And then after she came out, it seemed like this sort of goes towards her legacy as well. But like they were just trying to find a replacement or like another Amy Winehouse immediately. I remember Duffy and Adele pretty much, I think like 2 years after this album, they were pretty much, we were calling them the next Amy Winehouse. So like, there was obviously like, it started something and people were like wanted more of it. And yeah, I don't know. I feel like this album will be remembered, and it's going to, like, it'll, and her voice, it's mainly her, like she's going to be like an icon. I can see her, you know, her image being on t-shirts in the future, like people getting tattoos of her face. And I see her as one of those sort of, like, not to be like 27 Club, but just all those musicians, like a Jimi Hendrix, like a Janis Joplin, where they die at such a young age and it's such a tragedy that they're just going to be remembered forever. And And
Yeah.
for her, it's pretty much this album. So it's all like kind of contained. Well, there's Frank as well and the live performances, but this is the one that most people associate with Amy Winehouse.
So is there enough like for her to have an enduring impact on the trajectory of music? Like is there enough of content? I know this album is
Well,
amazing, but like
well, the trajectory of music, it's this album just sort of plays in the past. It's not
yeah.
really.
Yeah, it didn't really like influence much. Like you're right, they were trying to find a replacement
Oh
for
no,
her,
I
but
wouldn't say like music. I'd say it influenced a lot. Pretty much any female vocalist in any interview, like we were saying last week, where Lauryn Hill is always named. Amy
yeah.
Winehouse is another one
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
always named. Like I'd say probably 75% of vocalists will list Amy Winehouse as an
Yeah.
influence.
I guess what I mean by that, there wasn't like a jazz revival that came back after Amy
Well, there was
Winehouse.
literally Duffy did this. They tried to do the same thing with Duffy, and it kind of worked. And
Yeah.
I don't know, like for jazz, like jazz is always going to exist. It's always happening. So
It's
it
true.
was just a big album that was released, and it kind of transcended the subgenre to hit the mainstream, which is the biggest impact of any artist now. Because nowadays we live in a world where there's a bunch of every genre is almost niche. It seems like what can break out and sort of live on top of that. Like you'll have like a Taylor Swift that's huge, but not every female singer songwriter is huge. It's just
Hmm.
ones that kind of rise above the pudding. And this album's obviously stood the test this time. I'm sure it's still probably much beloved, and like these songs are still played nonstop on Spotify. So it's still living on, and it's almost 20 years old at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me ask a quick question to that. Do you think this album ages better based on the style? Like it was pretty much like all throwbacks. They had a specific era. Her voice covers like you could say from the 40s to like the early 70s. So it's like, and it seems like it's an album from the past, even though it's like a 2006 album.
It's one of those things where it's like it's out of time. It's sort of like a timeless sound. Like
Right. Yeah. It's more.
yeah, you can attribute jazz music or this type of jazz music to the 60s or 50s or 60s or whatever you want. But then you can also say like, there's still Michael Bublé releases albums all the time,
True. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not like it's a genre that's not an active genre. It's very active.
And this isn't really like we keep calling it jazz, but it's not like a Michael Bublé.
It's like contemporary jazz. Yeah.
But it's got more of this like funky, groovy 70s
Like
thing
more
going
soul
on.
kind of thing.
Yeah, more soul and stuff.
Yeah.
So it's like it's a mix of that stuff from that era.
It's like the pre-rock. It's like one step before rock music.
Yeah, no loud electric guitars yet. Well, I mean, rock was going on at the same time, but yeah, it's jazzy. But I was hoping for a whole bunch of copycat jazz. I mean, I just finished jazz school when I got into this, so I was like, oh man, maybe now I'm gonna have tons of work.
Well, we live in a world now where you pretty much have to like find your music. So I'm sure if you did a deep dive, you'd probably find like listen to Sharon Jones and the Dap Kings if you want
There we
more.
go.
That's a starting point. But there's other bands that are kind of reminiscent of like old jazz music.
Oh, definitely. I'm not saying you can't find it, but you won't find it on top 40s, unfortunately.
Well, that's what makes Amy Winehouse so unique. It's her voice. Her voice pushed past the genre. Her voice is what's the important part. The songs are all great. Don't get me wrong, but if someone else was singing these songs, this album wouldn't be what it is.
Well, yeah.
That's the power of Amy Winehouse. She could have made a pop album and we'd be talking about it probably the same.
But it's also the production of the album because it fit her voice so well. So somebody who maybe isn't into like the top 40 stuff, but maybe more classic music could hear it and be like, oh, this is pretty good. And so.
And that's the thing too, like reading interviews with Mark Ronson, it's like for him, he was just more of a pop producer. So for him doing this was like stepping out of his comfort zone. So for him, what you were saying earlier, he just went out, found the best musicians he could to come and play on it to kind of fill in the gaps of what he couldn't do.
Yeah, there's like a long list. Like I think it must have been like 40 or 50 people. I don't know if you guys saw the Wikipedia, like all the musicians who play on it. It's like, holy crap. Imagine if all of them were in the band. You got
No,
amazing.
Yeah, but
I
if you
don't-
look at like the top guys that play like bass, drums, guitar, like
yeah.
you look on the Wikipedia, those are the DAP Kings. Like those are the
right.
rest are just like trumpet,
Yeah.
saxophone, baritone.
Vibes, something,
Vibe.
tambourine.
On the violin. And then I think the other thing is, like, I think this is probably more on the Mark Ronson production side, whereas Salam Rami, he produced tracks for her on Frank, so he's always had a really good working relationship with her. And a lot of the times, like, he would, to get her writing or her creative process going, is he had a house in Miami. He'd be like, hey, come out for a few days, just hang out here. You could do whatever you want and just bring your guitar and write some tracks. So I think his was more of an intimate setting. And he would often just kind of like throw the drums and the piano and do it himself over it once he got the voice recorded. So I think that might be the difference in the sounds between the two producers.
Because because Ronson was even saying, like, to him, he just came in as like a hired, like he didn't know her, so he said he was kind of intimidated by her because she was like cool, like she was like a cool sort of like singer who didn't give a shit about anything, and like her first album was all like jazzy and soulful and like that whole image of being cool. And she was all smoking and stuff. So he was kind of intimidated and didn't even know how to step in. But something I said at the beginning, and Ryan was saying the difference. I find the Ronson stuff is just more like punchy. I don't know how to explain it. Like it's a lot more crisper. I think it's a lot of the stuff that Ryan's talking about, like that whole sort of that liveliness of it. Whereas the Salam Remy stuff, it's also great, but I find it's more, you kind of lose a bit of that punchiness and energy, even on like the slower even on the slower tracks. The Ronson production, you still have that like that pop sensibility that it's still like everything sounds crisp and everything sounds polished.
Okay, so I don't know who produced what tracks, but I'm just gonna guess because I did notice a difference. I'm not gonna guess through the whole album, but I noticed a difference when like the reverb changed and it became a more even overtly 50s like slapback kind of reverb. I don't know if
I have the producers up. Go for it. I have the producers up. So guess what songs you think are Ronson, and if
okay. Let's say Rehab is Ronson.
Yes.
You Know I'm No Good is Ronson.
Yep.
Me and Mr. Jones, Ronson.
No.
Oh, okay.
First Salam Rami track.
Yeah.
Okay, so Just Friends. I was thinking it was maybe this Salam guy.
Yep.
Yeah, because it's got that more reverb, jazzy intro, smoothie. So did he also do Back to Black?
No.
That's Ronson.
God damn it! I don't know who the hell did what.
It's I don't know. Like when you go back, because when I listened to it through, I thought it was all Ronson because that's my initial thought of Mark Ronson. Like my first memory of Mark Ronson is him being part of this album. So for me, it was in my head. It was always sort of Mark Ronson produced this whole thing. It wasn't until after I looked at it and I was like, oh shit. Like we literally just talked about the Fugees album and this guy worked on it.
You messaged me this week. I was like,
all unintentional. And then like listening through, knowing who did what, then I could hear the subtle differences, but it is subtle. It's one of those like
no songs feel out of place on this album.
No, but it's one of those like it's more probably some people always think that we're crazy, but if you know that there's a Mark Ronson did it and you listen to it, it's like, oh yeah, that one's you can hear the subtle differences between the two producers.
Okay, which one did He Can Only Hold Her?
Ronson.
Yeah, it's that crunchy snare. It's punchier. It's like it's not the 50s reverb of that like, rock and roll era. It's more like the 70s, late 60s kind of like classic rock, heart or funky kind of snare drum.
Even when you hear him in interviews, his big thing was getting the drum sounds right, like to make it sound like that, like the era.
Yeah, so another reason I should emphasize this album sounds great because it has real drums. I mean, like, I can hear a drummer playing on the radio. Thank you. More of that.
Always nice.
Yeah, I think I read earlier too, like a lot of the recording on the Mark Ronson side, at least, it was for I think the piano, the drums, and then something else. I'd have to double check. But those 3 instruments were kind of recorded all at once, and then the other stuff was recorded also separately. But the whole idea was just to kind of record everything with like one microphone to make it have that older sound. Like it's not like layered, even though like they definitely do use a lot of sound in this. But like it was a very it was a choice to record it in a certain way with all the instruments together for that live feel.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, and heck, if you've got all the instruments and all the players there at once, why not have them do it all together into a microphone? That's like, that's super classic. You just mix them by changing the distance from the mic. Good.
So I guess that kind of wraps everything up. Oh yeah, just kind of one other thing. She was tied amongst the females in for most Grammy wins by a female in a single night. So she was, the record at that point was 5. So she went up there, I think, with like Lauryn Hill, Norah Jones. I think there's a couple other ones, and then they were beat by 6 by Beyonce, and then Adele after that. Beyonce got 6 in 2010.
It's funny you mentioned Norah Jones, because Norah Jones seemed like she was sort of like the they were pushing her as like the next sort of like singer. She was almost like the 90s version of Amy Winehouse. I remember when she came out, they like gave her all the Grammys. They were sort of hyping her up, and she was great too. I loved her voice, but she sort of drifted away. I don't know what really happened there, but she was great too.
Yeah, I remember that one album just being like massive. That's kind of like the other thing, like exactly what you were saying, where this album was massive, and then it's like, oh, if I just sat down and listened to it, I would understand why. But I just never did. Same thing with that Norah Jones album, I think.
Oh, it's great. Like,
is it
like
good? You've heard it?
Don't Know Why and stuff like that's a great album. Even the album after it, I think, with like Sunrise, or is that the same album? But yeah, she had some good stuff too. It's her stuff is a lot more mellow though. A lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I heard some tracks on Amy Winehouse radio today. Sorry. So yeah, did you guys have anything else to add? I kind of jumped in there before we asked the question.
No, I think
we're ready for it. All right.
So is this album essential? Who wants to go first, or do you want me to go first?
I can go first. For me, I was sort of like weighing both ways, because it's one of those like there's so many songstresses, and a lot of the stuff that's going on in this album is sort of reminiscent from the past and like adding the new, and like, am I only going to give this an essential because she's dead, which also seems wrong. But at the same time, I feel like that sort of is part of the whole package and her legacy. And Amy Winehouse is a singer that I do think she's one of the greatest singers that we've heard in, I don't know, ever maybe. Like, her voice is so powerful and strong. It like it makes you emotional listening to this album. It gives you goosebumps. Like, it's not, and I'm a guy who listens to a lot of music, and there's very few singers that can do that to me. And when you look at her body of work, it's really, this is the album. Like, this is the album you're going to look to. So I think it's essential for that, just because she is one of the best voices of our time, and we only got 2 albums from her, and this is the one that's uses her voice the best. Yeah. Like, everything was sort of built around her, and it just sounds great, and it's timeless. That's the other thing. Like, we're talking about, is it dated, is it modern, is it this or that? It's just timeless. You don't put on a Billie Holiday song and say the song sounds old. You say the song sounds timeless. It still sounds great.
Yeah.
And I say these songs are the same way, and like, I kind of wish she was still around to like just kind of come out and give us live performances of all the classics.
Yeah, it's weird. It's time. It's like the sound is so classic, but it's also timeless because she is making it timeless. Like, the fact that they brought these sounds back as well as they did, and created that same classic vibe, but with like, you know, maybe modern themes and Amy's voice, obviously, like, unique voice. Everything lined up for her on this album. So if you want to, and the other part of this is the fact that she passed away. Like, that, I know we don't want to really, like you said, you feel bad like giving her the win because of that, but it really does change the way you feel about this album, like maybe more than any other album. And for that reason, like, there's something special about that. So don't let her die in vain. It's an essential album.
It's not like she has 10 albums and this is a great one and maybe there's another other great ones along the road. This is all we really have.
This is it, yeah.
So
True.
you kind of, no matter what sort of B-sides or live performances or whatever you listen to from Amy Winehouse, or even when you listen to Frank, it's probably, you're still going to come back to this one because this is the one that which made her famous pretty much, at least in America. Like, I didn't know who she was when Frank came out. It wasn't until Rehab dropped and it was like, who's this? Like, who's another great voice? Who is this?
Yeah, and I read that Frank wasn't technically released until after this album in like on our side of the pond.
Yeah.
So that's why, like, unless you downloaded or you had some weird connection to jazz or something like that, or not a weird, but a connection to jazz, you probably didn't know who she was pre this album. But yeah, no, I agree. I will say it is essential. I regretfully was pretty late to the Amy Winehouse party, but I'm glad I dove in this week and I got a really good understanding of kind of what she brought to music, who she was. I understand the depth of her character much more now than it's not just like, as George Lopez says, some drunk ass that didn't go to rehab or whatever. It's not. It's more than that now. So it's good. I'm almost on the flip side of what I just said. I know it sucks that I'm late to the party, but on the flip side of that, it's almost good to see it now that I'm a little bit older. Society's kind of changed, like, or culturally in terms of these issues and dealing with like substance abuse or depression, things like that. So it's a different, it's almost looking at it like through a different perspective now, or through a different lens. So even for that alone, it's pretty, like, all the other stuff, it's under a different context now. So I think this album's essential. I'll listen to it again. And I enjoyed listening to Amy Winehouse radio on Spotify, so I'll probably keep doing that too.
That's another thing, going to what you said about discovering it late. And it's one of those things that, like, we were in our early 20s when this album came out. And at that point, I don't expect every person in their early 20s or even like a teen to be sort of into this kind of music. It is just a style of music. It is something you kind of mature into, not to sound pretentious or anything, but there isn't a lot of teenagers throwing on like classic radio and being like, oh, check out like Billie Holiday and Etta James and all this. It's more of like something when you get older, you learn to appreciate, something you can throw on. So yeah, maybe even for me, like I'm more inclined to listen to throw this album now than I'm in my 30s than I was when I was going to the clubs when I was in my early 20s.
Yeah. It sounds, to me, it sounds mature. It sounds like the artists are accurate. Like, it sounds like everything is bang on. Like, these are pros. Like, I'm not going to name any names, talk about bands that we've seen that have not been pros on stage, but like, I don't really want to see that anymore. I want to see like someone who's way better than me on stage. That's what I'm paying for. Like, I was teaching a song to a student just last week. You remember the band Sunny Day Real Estate?
Yeah.
Remember this band? And it's like, a rock band, whatever. It's cool. At the very first like lead guitar thing the guy does, he like misses the first note when he slides in. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. It's like rock music, whatever. It's for kids. This is like for adults. Every note is bang on. The articulation in the horns is bang on. So
it's funny. It's funny you mentioned Sunny Day Real Estate because in this Foo Fighters episode, that's the drummer that was in Foo Fighters that he kicked out drumming because it wasn't good enough.
Sloppy. Yeah. Okay.
They kept the guitarist.
The bass was probably solid though, right?
Oh yeah, the bass. They kept the bass.
No, bass. That's Nate. He's in Foo Fighters.
Nate. Yeah, he's originally from Sunny Day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good band though. Sunny Day Real Estate.
Yeah, I like the song. Like, and we like. I mean, all three of us like bands that are messy and even play off that. We got to do a Pavement album soon. I mean,
yeah, at some point.
Yeah, I'm totally down. So I guess on that note, we'll wrap it up here. Unless, did you guys have any final thoughts before we close it out?
Roll the credits.
All right, here we go. Yeah. So yeah, thanks for joining us this week. It was it's kind of a heavy hitter, but I'm glad we got through and we talked about it. So yeah, thanks for joining us. If you're watching us on YouTube, appreciate it. Like and subscribe and share, help get the word out about our podcast, the Essential Albums Podcast. Original music by Ryan Dugal and artwork by Vincent Tran. Did you guys want to say who we're talking about next week, or just give a clue, or what do you want to do?
We're talking about your boy. That's all I would say. We're talking about your boy.
All right. Till then.
Yeah, till then. See you guys next week.